Welcome to Plant-Based on Fire, the podcast that ignites your passion for plant-based businesses. Real Men Eat Plants is proud to host this show, where we shine a spotlight on the latest and greatest plant-based companies making waves in the industry. From startups to established brands, we'll explore what sets these businesses apart, what challenges they've faced, and what their vision for a more sustainable and ethical food future looks like. So if you're hungry for some fresh insights, inspiring stories, and a healthy dose of entrepreneurial spirit, then join us on Plant-Based on Fire, brought to you by Real Men Eat Plants.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Plant-Based on Fire, where we talk about plant-based businesses and their inspiring stories to thrive in the industry. I am your host, Bryan, and joining us today is Paul Shapiro, CEO of the Better Meat Company. And he is an author of a national bestseller, and my favorite thing, a 5-time TEDx speaker and the host of the Business for Good podcast. Welcome to the show, Paul. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Bryan. Really great to be with you.
I am so excited to talk to you. I have watched a couple of your TED Talks, and congratulations. I'm nervous to do one, but maybe I'll do one sooner or later. But just talk to us about like your journey and like how did you get into this space and what inspired you to create the Better Meat Company?
It's a long story, Bryan, so I'm going to really abbreviate for you. All right. So let me start. So my parents met and they had me. No, just kidding. So, all right. When look, when I was 13, I saw a video of what happens to animals on factory farms and in slaughter plants. There's no YouTube or even no internet at all back then, but somebody gave me like a VHS tape of it. Right. And, for those who are not old enough to know, a VHS was like a rectangular piece of plastic that you inserted. I can see, Bryan, through some of your gray hair. I can know that you've
Yes,
used VHS.
I've been there.
That you've used VHS. But anyway, imagine if you could only watch one thing instead of millions of things. That's what was on you, whatever's on the VHS. So my friend gave it to me and I watched it and I was really horrified. I loved animals. I loved my dogs. My mom worked at a local animal shelter. And I just, kept thinking, what if these were my dogs? It was like if these were my dogs who were having their throats slit or being confined in cages where they could barely move an inch their whole lives, there's really nothing I wouldn't do to stop that. And so I became a vegetarian. I didn't really know what a vegan was, but I read something in a piece of paper, like a pamphlet about it. I thought it was vegan, actually. I was like, what are these vegans? I was like, but a few weeks later, I actually met some of these vegans who I learned were vegans, and that led me to become a vegan. So this was over 30 years ago. And I still am alive. In fact, it's kind of funny. I remember thinking at the time, when you become vegan or vegan, as I thought, I remember thinking, it's kind of like holding your breath. Like you can probably hold your breath for some time, but if you do it too long, you'll die. Right? So I thought that was like, maybe you can go without eating animal products for some amount of time, but surely you'll die at some point. But then I met people who had actually been doing it. And what really pushed me over the edge was there was an amazing Olympian athlete back then named Carl Lewis. And I really worshipped him. I had like a poster in my room in my parents' house when I was a teenager of Carl Lewis.
Yeah.
And I really worshipped him. And I read this article where he talked about how being vegan was part of his success in the Olympics. And I was like, geez, like if not just possible to do, but like the best athlete in the world, as far as I was concerned, was vegan. And I thought, okay, that's that. So it was animals who were my motivation, but then also like it gave me some assurance that Carl Lewis was doing it. So I really thought back then that the best thing to do was basically expose what is happening to animals and then people would change. And so I ended up founding an organization called Compassion Over Killing, which today is called Animal Outlook. And I ran that organization for about a decade, and we did all types of things like undercover investigations at factory farms and slaughter plants where, we would use hidden cameras and make documentaries about what we were doing. But eventually I came to realize that, while I think it's very helpful, most people, there's like a saying that, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, we'd all be vegetarian. But it's obviously not true, since most people who see a slaughterhouse video don't become vegetarian, right?
That's right.
And so I thought, well, maybe we need more laws on the books, like we need public policies. And so I ended up becoming a lobbyist for animals, and essentially for like 13 years was lobbying. And I felt very proud. We passed a number of laws to protect farmed animals, including banning some of the most extreme forms of confinement of animals in the egg industry and the pork industry. We defeated a lot of bad bills for animals. We passed a lot of good bills. But eventually I came to then think, after like 13 years of doing that, or really even maybe like 8 or 9 years in, I started worrying that maybe food technology and food innovation were going to do more than what I was doing. And so if you look, Bryan, at the ways in which categories of animal exploitation have been ended in the past, it's usually always through technological innovation. You look at, for millennia, we were, tormenting horses to force them to carry us around. And, there are big animal welfare campaigns throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, even at the very beginning of the 20th century, but especially, in the 19th century, to get, these horses better working conditions, watering stations, resting hours, Sabbath days where they couldn't be worked for a whole day, and so on. But Henry Ford ultimately came along and liberated horses. Like, he did more for horses than any animal advocates did. For millennia,
inadvertently, I don't even know.
Right. I mean, look, let me be clear. Like, Henry Ford was a horrible guy. He loved Hitler. He was an anti-Semite. Like, I'm not trying to exalt Henry Ford, but the truth is that he did a lot to help horses. And the same is so for whaling. Like, for thousands of years, we hunted whales and for oil to light our homes, and nobody stopped hunting whales because they cared about them. They stopped because kerosene was invented. We had a cheaper way to light our homes. For thousands of years, we live plucked geese in order to write letters. And nobody stopped, nobody stopped live plucking geese because they cared about geese. They stopped because metal fountain pens were invented. And the list goes on and on and on. Like, you can count all these types of animal exploitation that were ended, not because of humane sentiment, but really because of technological innovation. And so around like 2015, 2016, I started worrying that food technology, food innovation were going to do more than what I was doing. And so I wasn't quite sure what I could do. So I thought maybe I'll write a book. So I got very fortunate. It's kind of hubristic. Like, I had never published a book before, but Simon & Schuster bought the book. It's called Clean Meat: How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner in the World. And the book did dramatically better than I ever would have anticipated. And it opened up a lot of doors. It was very transformative in my life. And so I had the choice where I could continue writing about the people who I thought were going to solve this problem, or just become one of them. And that's when I decided to, with my friend Joanna Bromley, start the Better Meat Co. And 6 years later, we're still running it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's like 3 decades in a few minutes there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, go watch the TED Talks and read the books and all that kind of good stuff, and you'll get an even deeper understanding of what Paul has been up to here. But that really unlocks it for me, because like, when I first saw the Better Meat Co., I'm like, oh, it's one of these lab grown meats or whatever kind of thing. And then I watched your TED Talk with the geese and all that stuff, like you were just hinting at. And it just like blew my mind. Like, I've thought about it, but not in that kind of context. So you just shone the spotlight on it for me. I'm like, I got to get you on the podcast so we can talk about this more. So talk to us more about the Better Meat Company. Can you explain like the fermentation and the technology and how that all works, and how significant it is for the future of food?
Yeah, sure, Bryan. So first of all, I'm an advocate for cultivated meat, which is growing real meat without animals, but that is a futuristic technology. I don't mean it's futuristic in terms of, the capacity to grow it. People grow it all the time. There's like over 100 companies doing it. But I mean it's futuristic in terms of actually making a dent in the meat demand problem. Meat demand is going up, not down. Billions and billions and billions of animals are being raised for food, and the number only goes up every year. I've been vegan, as I said, for over 30 years, and every single year there have been more animals used for food than the previous year. So, we got to do something, right? What has been attempted has not been sufficient. I'm not saying it's not good, but it's just not sufficient. And so cultivated meat is years away from making a dent in the problem still, sadly. I wish it weren't true. Plant-based meat is making some dent today. Companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat are doing fantastic work. But there are a lot of limitations to using plants to make things that look like animal meat. So think about how you make it right now. Like, you've got to grow a field of peas, harvest a field of peas, mill that into a flour, but that flour is pretty low in protein. So you've got to strip out the fiber, strip out the fat, concentrate it down into like a pea protein powder. But that powder, while very protein packed, is now not textured like animal meat. So you've got to extrude it, which is a fancy way of saying lots of pressure and lots of heat. And then you add a dozen or two more ingredients to it, and you got plant-based meat there. And so there's a lot of things that you have to do. People wonder, peas are much cheaper than beef. So why are Beyond Burgers so much more expensive than beef? Well, because they're not just made out of peas. They're made out of, pea protein isolate that's been extruded and then added to numerous other ingredients. So that's a lot to do. And so the question is there another way, right? Like we know in renewable energy, there's lots of ways to make energy without fossil fuels: wind, solar, geothermal, nuclear, etc. Well, when you're trying to replicate the meat experience without animals, there's lots of ways you can do it. There's cultivating animal cells, there's isolating plant proteins, but then there's also fungi fermentation. And with fungi fermentation, which is what we do at the Better Meat Co., you can grow products that are packed with protein and that have a meat-like texture naturally, straight out of the fermenter. So you don't have to do all those downstream processes that I just enumerated with plants. And so what we do is we inoculate a fermenter with a microbial organism. And literally 16 hours later, we can harvest that, and you have meat equivalent, right? You don't have to do anything to it for the most part to make it into something that is extremely proteinaceous, extremely high in fiber, very high in iron and zinc and so on. So really, like, you get the things that you want from meat: protein, iron, zinc, the texture, the satiating effect, without all the things you don't want from meat. Not the cholesterol, the saturated fat, the animal cruelty, all the climate changing emissions, and so on. And so that is the benefit of fungi fermentation, or making what's called mycoprotein, is that, it's like really fermenter to fork dining. You get a product that I think does a better job of mimicking the meat experience. Now, admittedly, there are many people who are probably listening to this or thinking, well, why mimic the meat experience at all? Like, why not just eat plants? And that's awesome. Like, if you're happy eating lentils, more power to you. I would wish everybody would do that. Sadly, humanity has shown that it wants meat. Like, I hate to say it, it's kind of like saying, well, why can't we just walk and bike? Why do we need cars? Well, people like to drive, and we need to make cars that don't rely on fossil fuels. We need to make EVs. Similarly, people want meat. I wish it weren't so. I wish that we were different, but people want meat. And I mean, I was given a talk not that long ago at a Veg Fest, and it was so sad. Literally, it was like a cartoon. There was one booth for quinoa kale wraps, and there was another booth for Beyond Burgers, and they were right next to each other. And even at a Veg Fest, people who were interested in vegetarian eating, the line for the Beyond Burgers was probably half an hour long, whereas there was no line at the other one. So, I just think, you got to accept human nature as it is, as flawed as we are. And that's why we have to create meat experiences that don't involve animals.
Absolutely. I mean, I've become a big fan of the mushrooms as I got into the vegan diet, for sure. And the mushrooms can simulate a lot of that stuff, the lion's mane and all that stuff. But I agree with you. And I think like the standard American diet and just the American culture as well, and that's what I started Real Many Plants all about, is because masculinity is tied to this meat and this sensation, and we have to change the narrative.
I agree with everything you just said, Brian, but I'll just augment it by saying it's not just America. It's everywhere. I mean, look at China, India. They have millions of people who are thankfully escaping poverty and joining the middle class. And the first thing they do is start eating more meat. That's the first thing they do. I mean, people,
like the China study has shown over and over,
Generally, people are going to eat about as much meat as they can afford to eat. Now, there are many people like you and me who, I'd be thrilled if I came to your house and you offered me lion's mane. I'd be overjoyed.
That's right.
But sadly, and first of all, lion's mane is dramatically more expensive than animal meat. But second, it's not a replacement for meat. Like, nobody's going to eat it and think I can't tell the difference, and it has no protein. So there are a lot of hurdles to trying to use the fruiting bodies of mushrooms to replace meat. That's why mycoprotein, or growing what's called mycelium, or the root-like structure of fungi, is so good, because you get a meat-like texture with all of that protein as well.
That's awesome.
I mean, the mycoprotein that we grow at the Better Meat Co. has more protein than eggs. It's got more iron than beef, more zinc than beef, more protein than eggs. It's a complete protein with all the essential amino acids. I mean, it really is like a superfood.
That's right. That's awesome. And so how has the market responded to your products, especially in that traditional meat eater space?
Yeah. People love it. Like, we make steaks out of this mycoprotein, and became the first non-animal steak to ever go on a steakhouse menu in the United States. That's how good it was, and is. And people really love it. The problem is that, right now there's a bit of a famine period in alternative meats and alternative proteins in general. There's less investment in the space. Demand has waned to some extent because of inflation, since these products are more expensive than animal meat, and inflationary times mean people are going to spend less on these higher priced products.
Yeah.
So those are all problems right now that affect not just us, but the entirety. Like, even if you look at Beyond Meat, they've really struggled in the last couple of years, in part because of inflation and some of these other things. But smaller companies like mine at the Better Meat Co., it's tougher to do everything from raise capital to procure agreements and more.
Absolutely. So let's unpack some of this, because a lot of the people I talk to in like the plant-based coaching and the world that I'm in for that are trying to get into this food space. So what are some of the challenges and the opportunities in scaling up production to meet the demand that's going to come?
Well, it's hard to get money for CapEx, for capital expenditures right now. Like, if you were raising money let's say you wanted to found a company and try to raise money in 2021, the capital was far more free flowing. You could find people who want to invest in this space. Today, in 2024, that is not necessarily the case. And so you have to find other ways of funding what you want to do, whether it's grants, loans, equipment financing, self-financing, and others. Or you can try to do something that's less capitally intensive, right? Like, running a mycoprotein fermentation costs a lot of money because you have to buy these huge stainless steel fermenters, and you need steam, you need air compression. Like, there's a lot of stuff you've got to do to pay for the startup costs. Once you're running, the operating expenses aren't that high, but the startup cost is high for the capital, for the equipment that you need. All of that said, if I were starting a company today, I probably would be trying to start something that was less dependent on venture capital, because we're in a period of famine with venture capital, where these deals are like gone down. They're not non-existent, but they're rare. Compared to what they were. I mean, I remember in 2021, like, every week you'd be hearing about somebody raising 10 million here, 50 million there, 100 million there. Like, it was like an incredible time. You just thought, wow, like, these trees are going to grow to the sky. But of course, trees don't grow to the sky. They stop. And right now there's a bit of a shrink.
Yeah. I mean, the interest rates are just astronomical right now, so we've got to figure that out for sure.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. That's another big problem, is that with high interest rates, basically people who have a lot of money who would be investing in startups can find safer ways to invest. Most startups fail. There's like a 90% mortality rate, and so the goal for these venture investors is to have a few that succeed wildly to offset the losses from the majority that fail. And if you can get guaranteed 5% in treasury bills, it's not that bad of a thing, right? Like, those people who have money would rather get a guaranteed 5% than take the risk. And you have some really savvy investors who think that they can do better than the market, but if you get it's not, it's hard to turn down guaranteed free money, which is what treasury bills are right now.
That's right. Yeah. But this is a call out to all you billionaire vegans out there. Come take the risk, jump in to companies like Paul and help us change the world. So
what I would say on that, like, I totally agree with you, Brian, but I would say is the following. There are a lot of people who are accustomed to making philanthropic contributions because they want to help animals, and they want to promote vegan eating, or whatever their motivation is. When you make a philanthropic donation, that's fantastic. But you're not going to get a return on that, right? Like, you might get a tax write-off, but that's it.
Yeah.
That's all you're going to get is a tax write-off. You might get a social return where you feel good knowing what you accomplished, but there's a 100% chance you're going to lose 100% of your money. Whereas if you make an investment in startups that are out there that could be even more effective than the charity you were thinking about donating to, you might get a return. Maybe you won't, but the worst case scenario is that you won't get a return, which you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So I'm not saying not to donate to charities. Obviously, I think it's good to donate to charities. I'm just thinking, if you think about investments in startups that way, it seems less risky, because your alternative would have been losing all the money anyway.
I agree completely, because I do some micro investing myself to a degree, and I like to say I'm putting the money out there. I'm trying to be the change I need to see in the world, but I want to put my money out in as many places as I can. So when one of those 1 out of 10 hits, I can get a
Yeah.
return and dump it
I,
back in. So
I hope you've put money in the next NVIDIA, Brian. That would be
that's
awesome.
right.
Yeah.
Me too. Me too. So talk to us about, the future of the Better Meat Co. What are you working on? What are some of the new products and developments? What's on the horizon?
The biggest problem for us is scale. We have an amazing crop, this mycoprotein, that is such a great way to mimic the meat experience, that does a better job than plants for less money. And if we could scale this, it is not only an extremely valuable business, but it could really be among the best things to have ever happened for animals. And
That's right.
And so for us, like, we need to scale. The demand for our product vastly exceeds our supply right now. I liken it to, when you're in fermentation, it's kind of like having a farm. Our fermenter is a farm, and instead of crops, we're growing microbes. And imagine if you had 1 acre and you could produce this really magical crop that could solve so many world problems. And the demand, you had 50,000 acres worth of demand, but you only had 1 acre to produce. That's what we face at the Better Meat Co. right now. The demand is astronomical. The supply is quite finite. And so we need to build a much, much bigger facility. We can do that in the Midwest of the United States, or we could do it in another part of the world, like Asia or India, et cetera. We're open to any of those options. We wouldn't do it in California, probably. It's just too expensive to do it here. But so we're looking for partners who can help us scale, who can help us build something 20 times bigger than what we currently have. And that's just the start. That's just the start.
I love it. So let's help the other entrepreneurs that are watching this a little bit. What has been the biggest challenge in founding and growing a startup in this alternative protein space?
Every day, Brian, I feel like Sisyphus pushing a boulder up the hill. There's a funny line from a good book from Ben Horowitz, one of the co-founders of Andreessen Horowitz, of venture capital fund, and he says, he has this book called "The Hard Thing About Hard Things," and he says that when you found your own company, you will sleep like a baby because you will wake up every 2 hours and cry. And so, that's definitely like how I feel. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you something. People can see this video, right? It's not just audio, or is that not true? Okay.
Yep.
So let me see if I can get this real quick. I would love to show you this cool thing. So I said I feel like Sisyphus, like pushing the boulder up the hill. So I had commissioned this artwork that I keep on my desk. I'm going to show you a photo of it since I'm not at my desk. But this is what I keep on my desk. Can you see that? It's Sisyphus finally triumphant. And so he's finally got the boulder to the top of the hill. And so anyway, the point is that that's what I envision, and that's what I want to bring into the world, is Sisyphus finally triumphant. There's so many problems. It's so difficult all the time. A lot of the times people think about startup foundership and they glorify it and romanticize it. I could just tell you it's hard. It's very hard. But what makes it worth it is, one, of course, the mission that you're seeking to achieve something quite great. In my case, hopefully a desire to end a huge amount of violence against animals. And second, I love, people I work with. It's like every day you're fighting with these people in the trenches to try to bring something out of nothing. So, look, what is, I don't want to evade your question. Like, you've asked, what are the toughest things? Is like, people who say they were going to invest and they don't. People who say that they're going to, come work for you and then don't. People who leave who you want to stay. Ingredient vendors who don't get you the product on time. Equipment breaking that then costs you a lot of money to fix. And then the supplier doesn't want to honor the warranty. I mean, it's a never-ending thing. Every day I come home, my wife is like, what was the worst thing that happened today? I don't even tell her. She's like, hey, welcome home. What was the worst thing that happened? And, I can assure you it's a hard thing to do. But that said, there are many really fantastic highs of it. I don't want to make it seem like I'm some martyr suffering here. Like, there are many fantastic highs that I'm very honored to be able to do this.
Absolutely. I absolutely love it. And I can't agree with you more, just because, like, as a fractional CTO myself, or as a business coach, like, I tell people all the time, plan for the unexpected. Business continuity has to be on your radar because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I have been right there, even just trying to get this podcast off the ground, waking up at 6 a.m. Like, I've got this idea. I can't sleep anymore. I've just got to go get it down on paper. I'm worried about this or that. So yeah, so I think that perseverance and that pressure of a startup definitely helps people. Is there any other quick bits of advice for other entrepreneurs that they must take this into account? I think an aspiring piece of artwork is a great idea. I know for several of the businesses I've built in the past, I saw a piece of art on vacation and I bought it and I said, like, this is my motivation for this business now.
Nice.
So I love that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, this one, I thought surely somebody must have drawn Sisyphus triumphant, and nobody had. I looked all over, so I basically commissioned a guy on Upwork to do it, and he did a great job. There's this guy in Mexico, and he did an awesome job.
Very cool.
But anyway, I had it printed, and it's on my desk. The number one thing that I would suggest is just literally one word: start. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, too many people, they have like analysis paralysis, and they're like, oh, I need to read all these books first and whatever. It's like, imagine like somebody says to you, hey, Bryan, I want to become a great soccer player. You're not going to say, okay, well, here are all the books on soccer that you need to read. Like, you get on the field and you start practicing. And
that's right.
I just think, like, nothing substitutes for experience, and you just have to start, and you're going to make mistakes. Obviously, everybody does, but you've got to actually get out there and start. And that doesn't mean go out there not knowing anything. Like, when I started this company, I talked to tons of people who had started companies before, both successful and failed. And I would ask them, why'd you fail? Or why'd you succeed?
That's right.
So anyway, I'm all for, talking to people, getting their advice and so on, but mainly it's just start.
That's right. Yep. I agree completely. If you've got the idea, start doing those customer discovery calls and figure it out, really. So I guess the most important question is, where are you at? What can we do as a community to help you? How do we get in touch? And where can I get this in the Charlotte area?
Okay. Lots of questions there. So let me go sequentially. First and foremost, we're accepting new investors. If you want to own a piece of the Better Meat Co., I'd love to hear from you. You can message us. Just go to our website, bettermeat.co. Again, that's bettermeat.co. Second, if you're interested in reading my book, I'd love for you to read it. It's called Clean Meat. The website for it is cleanmeat.com, but you can buy it anywhere books are sold, Amazon, etc. And there's a new edition coming out in April of 2024. That'll be a paperback edition put out by Simon & Schuster. So it'll be an updated edition of the book. Third, you can currently buy, products with Better Meat Co. ingredients throughout California, but nothing to my knowledge in North Carolina. But we love you to try our steak. That's really the best thing I think that we make. It's really a fantastic steak. And so if you're a restaurateur and you're thinking, I want to offer a really awesome animal-free steak on your menu, please contact us, bettermeat.co. We'd love to work with you.
Very, very cool. Absolutely. So come on, people, get those on the menu. Reach out to Paul at bettermeat.co. And is there anything else the community can do to help besides those couple things?
That's a lot of requests out there, so I'll leave it at that, Bryan. But I appreciate everything that everyone who's listening is doing to help animals. They need all the advocates they can get. And so if you're one of them, people who's trying to give a voice to the voiceless, my gratitude goes out to you.
I love it. Well, that is all the time we have for this episode of the Plant-Based on Fire podcast. Thank you again so much, Paul, for being here, joining us, sharing your insights and experiences with our community. Until next time, everybody, keep that fire burning.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Plant-Based on Fire. We hope you enjoyed learning about the innovative plant-based businesses we featured today and got inspired to support them on their journey. Remember, plant-based eating isn't just a trend. It's a way of life that benefits your health, the environment, and animals. By choosing plant-based foods, you're making a positive impact on the world and helping to create a better and more compassionate future. If you want to join the Real Men Eat Plants community and get even more resources to help you go and stay plant-based, check out our blog, podcasts, and 30-day challenge at realmeneatplants.com. Thank you for tuning in to Plant-Based on Fire, brought to you by Real Men Eat Plants. Head over to Apple Podcast and give us a review, and let us know what you think of this episode. Don't forget to tag us at Plant-Based on Fire when you share this episode in your preferred social media. Wish to be a guest? We need to know about your plant-based business. Email us at pbof@realmeneatplants.com. We love hearing from our listeners. Thank you to our guests and to you, our listeners, for your support, and see you next time.